Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. An estimated 24,000 women and girls living in the UK have been subjected to the practice of FGM, female genital mutilation, or, to its defenders, female circumcision. A recent campaign by A-level student Fama Mohammed, backed by The Guardian, sought to encourage schools to educate pupils about FGM. The campaign's petition generated more than 100,000 signatures in less than 24 hours after it was launched. The petition later reached nearly 250,000 signatures and saw the government write to every school in England, warning them to be alert for the dangers of FGM. The government has also sought to use the law against practitioners of FGM, but there have been no successful prosecutions to date. However, this could change after two people were charged by the Crown Prosecution Service following an investigation by police officers in the London Borough of Islington. They were charged on the Female Genital Mutilation Act of 2003 and the Serious Crime Act of 2007. So is this a success for the campaign to rid the UK of FGM? We spoke to Dr. Wanda Waporska, Lead Equalities Officer of the Association of Teachers and Lecturers, who's been active in raising awareness about FGM.
Well, ATL is very happy that the law is being seen to be followed, and we know that the Metropolitan Police, along with other people, have worked very hard to secure these prosecutions. Obviously, we can't comment on the case, but we think it gives a good example. We think it raises awareness of FGM, and it also says that the UK is not a place that will tolerate this child abuse. ATL believes that teachers have an important role to play, as do all education staff and people who work in nurseries as well, because they come into contact with young people and they can notice the signs if they know that a child has been subjected to FGM, or if a child is talking about going on a journey, having a ceremony that will make them a woman. And that's why we're trying to raise awareness of FGM, so that teachers and other people who may not be aware of it might pick up the signs, might be able to help a young girl in future. And if we can just save one child from going through this, then, you know, that's a good job done. But we're hoping that we can save many more. Now, teachers can act through the curriculum. There's lots of good work that's being done through PSHE and other subjects. And, you know, Sarah Vine, Michael Gove's wife, might have said that, you know, why do white children in leafy Suffolk or anywhere else need to know about female genital mutilation? Well, I'll tell her why. It's because children aren't in isolation. And many children, when they're going through something bad, will speak to other young people. They'll speak to their peers before they'll speak to a parent. And one of the young people who'd done a session on FGM said, well, I'm really pleased that I know about this now, because if a friend of mine or a neighbour of mine is going through this and they're scared and they don't want to tell the police or they don't want to tell their parents, then I can help them. And I think that's why all children need to know about FGM, in an age-appropriate manner, of course. I think that young people up and down the country need to know about FGM because, let's face it, we have a more transient population now with the introduction of universal credit. Many people will be moving out of bigger cities and into smaller places. Many teachers move around and young people move around in schools. And it's vital that they know about FGM so that they can help their friends, help their peers, help their neighbours, and so that we can end this in a generation.
So joining me to discuss FGM and the role played by schools, teachers and teaching unions are Hilary Burridge, who's a consultant sociologist, who's currently writing a book entitled Eradicating Female Genital Mutilation, a UK Perspective. Also joined by Sheikh Abdullah Hassan, an imam at the Khadija Mosque and Islamic Centre in Peterborough and a trustee of the Imams Against Domestic Abuse. On the phone we have Anila Anwar, who's head of the projects at Roshni, which is an organisation working with minority ethnic communities in Scotland. And on the line we have Dr. Suja Shafi, Deputy Secretary-General and Chief Medical Advisor of the Muslim Council of Britain. Welcome to you all. Hilary, there seems to be a renewed kind of burst of publicity and activism around this now, compared to all the time that legislation's been on the books, for instance. So is this now beginning to make a difference where publicity before didn't?
I think for two or three reasons. First is, about the year 2000, the United Nations and various big, important African groups of women declared that it was really time to get on and do something. Then there was the 2012 Universal Declaration against it. At the same time, we've moved the vocabulary in this country and elsewhere. And now almost universally it is agreed that in formal terms we have to call this mutilation. It's not just cutting. Obviously we use different terms talking to different people at different times, but it is now mutilation. We all understand that. We understand the horror of it, which we didn't before.
Just let me stop you there, because that's an interesting point. So when did that transition in the language happen?
It started after basically what we might call the African Queens, which was the big women leaders in Africa, they call themselves African Queens, started talking about it, and they said, and WHO, World Health Organization, said, this is mutilation. It's not just cutting, though I'm horrified by that as well, but it's not just that. This is actually really ruining people's physiology, their anatomy and their physiology, and it is incredibly dangerous, incredibly painful. It ruins people's lives. We've got to stop it. So the words are important.
Sheikh, in the introduction we said, I think something like 24,000 women and children. But how much of that, and we also heard in the introduction that people often travel for this to happen to them. How much of that actually happens in the UK and how much of it happens outside the UK, or do we just not know that?
I personally don't know the numbers exactly regarding these particular issues, but I think I mentioned before, we need to differentiate between what is FGM and Islamically, from Islamic perspective, what is sanctioned within Islam in terms of female circumcision. I know the words are very, very conflated at the moment, but I think there is a distinction, and we should not conflate FGM or what is sanctioned within Islam. Obviously, we don't have time to really go into the details, but there is, even in our society, in the UK society, in the Western societies, we have women who go to surgeries and they have cosmetic surgery done because of certain reasons. We don't call that FGM. Just because it's done under some clinic, under some guidelines, doesn't mean it's FGM. So we have to distinguish between what is FGM and female circumcision, I think.
Do you accept that distinction?
If we talk about people who are over 18 years old and there is some medical or psychological reason why they perhaps require what we might call cosmetic surgery, then I might not like it, but I think that I will leave the lawyers to decide whether or not it's legal. Anything that affects under 18-year-olds, anything that is done under coercion or is done because a woman feels she must have it done because she's scared not to, that is violence, in my view.
Anila, let me bring you into the discussion now. Do you have any sense of what the proportion of people who undergo this mutilation in Britain is compared to the numbers that are taken abroad?
I think it's really difficult to tell for the very same reasons why it's so difficult to secure prosecutions within this country. It's such a hidden practice, simply because families don't want to speak out against their own family members by the nature of the offence. It's carried out by parents, by aunts, by uncles, by other close neighbours or community members, and at the end of the day, disempowered young girls aren't going to speak out against their family that otherwise they love and care for. And that's the reason why we're finding it difficult to get a grasp on what are the exact and precise figures within the UK. And because we're only now beginning to see a renewed interest in FGM by health professionals, by teachers, by even prosecution services, there aren't enough reports being made by frontline staff either. But to be honest with you, I think this focus on statistics is unhelpful. What we know is that we have community members from practicing countries living within the UK. They are having children, therefore there are girls who are from practicing communities living in the UK and they're potentially at risk of FGM. And that should be enough for us to take the issue seriously and take whatever measures in order to protect these young girls.
I mean, I take your point on that, but do you think that actually, as in many other situations where sexual violence is an issue, that the figures are likely to be underreported?
Definitely underreported. As I was saying, it's a very, very hidden issue, and people don't want to come out and speak against their own family members. Therefore, it's difficult to tell and it's difficult to report. So as with other forms of violence against young people and sexual violence, it's very underreported, and we're only at the tip of the iceberg at the moment. A lot of the work that's being done in the UK is being done with survivors of FGM, so we know that there are still women who have been mutilated, whether that's been abroad or here. It's still a practice that's happening globally, and we need to take steps both within the UK and internationally to protect women and girls.
And do you, just let me ask you what your take is on the distinction that Sheikh Hassan made there between some cosmetic
I think I'd like to echo Hilary's comments. At the end of the day, it comes down to choice. If someone who is a child and isn't able to give consent to this practice, which is, let's be clear, child abuse, there's no issue and no distinction. It doesn't matter what you call it. And at the end of the day, communities don't call it mutilation. They don't call it circumcision. They don't call it cutting. They have their own words for it. So it really becomes irrelevant what we call it. What we need to be clear about is that it's a form of child abuse and it shouldn't happen. I think what would be helpful for our religious leaders to come out and say is that there's no religious requirement for girls to be cut, circumcised or mutilated, whatever terminology you want to use. And that's what the message we really should be taking out into the communities, is there's no need for this to be done.
Let me put that point to Dr. Shafi. Dr. Shafi, is that your stance? Is that what you think religious figures should be saying?
Yes, I think it's very important to clarify that this is not a practice which is Islamic. It's not a requirement, an Islamic requirement. It's not an Islamic requirement, and that is the way we are campaigning. It's more a cultural practice, and sometimes people do get confused between cultural and religious requirement. So that's the first. The other thing is that it should be treated as child abuse, especially when children of young age are taken without permission, without their to get a practice that is illegal, performed either in this country or taken abroad precisely for that purpose. That, I think, is the important thing to recognize.
I mean, Hilary, there's an important point being made there about whether it's a religious practice and there's a religious requirement, or whether it's a cultural practice, because this happens in an environment where it's almost automatically assumed that this is something which is being spoken about to do with the Muslim community, when that's not necessarily the case.
No, it's not the case. More Muslim people don't do it than do, is the first thing to say, and I mean considerably more. We, as you've said, we can't ever measure it exactly. We don't yet know, but it's a minority. However, it's a minority that is spread across different communities rather than different faiths. For instance, in parts of Africa, there are bands, if you like, of FGM practicing communities which don't even necessarily have the same faith, but it's something that has happened forever and ever and ever. And what it is important, I make no excuse for it ever, and I would never, ever, ever excuse it in any sort of way. But nonetheless, there are people who seriously and honestly believe, dreadfully unfortunately, that a woman is not pure and she can't get married unless she's had it done. Now, that does place parents who believe that and potential husbands who believe it in a difficulty. And we have to say, that's nonsense. It really is absolutely nonsense. Do you really want to ruin people's health, possibly kill them? But that's what they believe, and it is that deep. It's not even a cultural belief, it's a historical belief, traditional belief that has to be counted very, very strongly indeed across every faith and no faith. I mean, there's plenty of people, for instance, who declare themselves to have no faith, but they still want to fight that.
Jake?
I think I would agree regarding the if there are children who are forced to or coerced to carry out these surgeries, whether here or abroad, that is completely wrong from an Islamic perspective, from a non-Islamic perspective. But I think we have to be nuanced in this, and to make a blanket statement that Islam does not, it's not an obligation per se, but there is a flexibility where if there is a need for adults to carry out this surgery from a cosmetic perspective, then there is a allowance there. And to completely say there is no allowance is completely forbidden and not make a distinction, I think where we are going in the borderline of black and white language, which really will not help our communities in this area.
Anila, let me ask you about this balance between, there's clearly a big push to educate about this, and there's also now some prosecutions. How do you think this balance should be struck between the educational initiatives and the use of the law?
I think the use of the law is only one part of the solution. Obviously, prosecutions have their place because they send out a clear and strong message that FGM is not going to be tolerated within this country, and that's got to be a part of the solution. But along with that, we need to be working with communities, and this work needs to be led by communities, and up in Scotland it certainly is being, where we're educating and raising awareness about all of the reasons why FGM is not okay, why it's not helpful to women or girls, and dispelling a lot of the myths and traditions that are in place. And we need our education and health professionals as well to be working along with us, to be aware of FGM, aware of indicators, aware of the fact that young girls could potentially be at risk, and the focus should be on them in order to make reports or report concerns to the relevant authorities so that we can prevent. At the end of the day, if there's a prosecution, then we're already too late because someone has been mutilated, someone has been harmed. So it should really be about prevention, and that needs to be a joint kind of multi-agency community effort where we're involving communities, we're involving religious leaders, and we're also involving our public services to make sure we're all working together to protect children.
Okay, Dr. Shafi, what do you make of this? How do you see the balance that should be struck between education and the use of the law?
I think it's important that the education includes the knowledge or the information that it's against the law. And I think in terms of using the law to, in this regard, one should also remember that if you talked about 24,000 or so people have the female genital mutilation done on them. Now, these are the individuals who, at some stage or the other, because of the difficulties, the medical difficulties and the complications, would require some repairs and surgery, which I think the Imam is referring to as cosmetic, and sometimes it may be a necessity. So I think we need to make that distinction and make sure that the practice of the primary objective of carrying out female genital mutilation has to be differentiated from the practice of repairing the damage that has been caused. And I think we should not therefore use it as a blanket cover. But as far as the Muslim Council of Britain is concerned, we are very clear, having taken advice from a number of religious scholars, the Islamic Sharia Council to start with, Muslim College, and women's organizations who are all absolutely against this practice and claim that this is, as have advised us, that this is against, this is not an Islamic practice.
Okay. Hilary, what do you make as a balance here that needs to be struck between education and the use of the law?
Well, in the 1980s, I actually wrote a chapter on health education for a major published concern with schools and teaching the social curriculum. At that point, it was HIV rather than FGM that was the really sticking point. It is essential. Two things happen. One is that children have to be aware of it in whatever is age-appropriate and context-appropriate ways. We don't talk about it in relation to religions. We just say, this is, this could happen, and we've got to make sure that neither you nor your friends nor your sisters have it happen. Just as when we talk about HIV, this is a very sensitive thing. The other thing is we have to make sure that teachers are confident and are working with other organisations. And I will just say one thing very, very firmly here. At the moment, the system does not make it easy for teachers to cope with this. There are a lot of reasons why. I mean, for instance, men teachers may feel very uncomfortable about dealing with it. So there has to be a process whereby instantly they can refer it to somebody that they see as more appropriate, if that is what is the case. For instance, male teachers won't want to talk to small children, small girls about it. It's just so they have to find a way that doesn't happen. It has to be very overt, very clear. That is what you do. Reporting must be mandatory. There must be no discretion about it. Somebody else make the decision about what to do. You as the teacher must be, or the nurse or the doctor, obliged to say, I think this child is at risk, as you would for any other serious risk to a child, right? And at the moment we have this absolutely disparate series of different ways you can report these things, none of them very overt. We need one single easy way to report serious child risk or the possibility of serious child risk.
Just let me ask you about that then. So that doesn't exist. You're a teacher, you think that something's happening. There isn't a sort of designated chain of reporting.
I pretended I was a teacher the other day, just as if I was just starting, and I just thought there's a little girl here that I'm really worried about. And I started Googling and doing all the other things you do to find. There's the local safeguarding board. There is officially going to be somebody in my school who will have a safeguarding responsibility if she's in school and if she has moved to another job, etc., etc. There is the social services. You try getting hold of social services, you know, outside office hours. They're very busy people. It's really difficult. The police, well, you go into a police station, do you? And you just say, oh, I think there's a little girl at risk. I've seen something like that happen. It doesn't work very well. There has to be some very simple state-organised, state-owned in the sense of that the responsibility lies with senior politicians' way, that any teacher, any nurse, any other youth worker, whatever, can pick up the phone and say, this is what I'm worried about.
Well, let me just put that point to Anila before we get to the break. Because, I mean, in a way, you know, that's as shocking as anything we've heard, isn't there? That there seems to be, well, frankly, a mess when it comes to reporting this.
I just think that there's been a lack of joined-up working, and obviously when there is a child protection issue, there has to be a multi-agency response that involves the, you know, frontline member of staff, be that an education member of staff, a teacher, and the necessary people that need to then take steps, which may include social work services, and it may also include the police. And there's a historical baggage there that agencies don't always share information well together or work well together. But let me be clear, and certainly within Scotland, FGM falls under child protection policy, practice and guidelines, and there should be a clear and direct route in any organisation, be that a public organisation or be that a third sector voluntary organisation. If you have a concern about a child, it should be reported to your lead child protection officer, who will then make a report to the police if they assess that their risk makes that necessary. So if that's not getting through to the frontline staff and the teachers, then that's where the education and awareness needs to be focused. And I have to say that a letter to teachers and head teachers reminding them that FGM falls under child protection procedures maybe just falls short of that. And what there needs to be by government is a focused effort on educating teachers, as Hillary's been saying, so that they're aware of what FGM is, that children and young people in this country are at risk. It is an issue that's relevant to them and they should know about, and what the direct referral routes are for them to make their concerns known.
OK, well, I'm going to have to stop you there because we've come to the end of the first part of the programme, but we will be continuing the discussion after the break, so do rejoin us.